June 28, 1914. A gunshot in Sarajevo. 4 years later, 4 empires are gone. The Russian Tsar and his family executed in a basement. The Ottoman Empire, 600 years old, shattered. Austria-Hungary split into 7 countries. The German Kaiser in exile. Monarchy dead. But this is just the beginning. Between 1914 and 1918, 4 empires collapsed. The British aristocracy lost 20% of its heirs. The borders of 14 new countries were drawn. Communism, fascism, and modern democracy all emerged. Between 1939 and 1945, none of that happened. World War II was fought using the systems World War I created. The ideologies it birthed, the borders it drew, the nation-states it established. World War I was the earthquake. World War II was the aftershock. This is how the modern world was born. If you're into history that examines how societies transform, not just battles and generals, hit subscribe. Let's establish what the world looked like before 1914. Europe was dominated by empires and monarchies. The Russian Empire. 304 years of Romanov rule. The Tsar controlled 1/6 of the world's land surface. Over 125 million subjects. Autocratic rule. The Ottoman Empire. Founded in 1299. 600 years of continuous rule over the Middle East and North Africa. The Austro-Hungarian and German empires, the Habsburgs and Hohenzollerns, centuries-old dynasties ruling millions. The British Empire, a quarter of the world's land surface, 412 million subjects. The French Empire, second largest colonial empire, monarchs ruled by divine right. Aristocracy was the natural ruling class. Empires were the standard political unit. Class hierarchy seemed unchangeable. In Britain, aristocrats owned the land. Women couldn't vote. The social order was rigid. In Russia, serfs had only been freed in 1861. Most were still peasants. In Germany, the officer corps was exclusively aristocratic. The system had existed for centuries. It seemed permanent. Then came August 1914, and in 4 years, it was gone. But how do you kill a system that's lasted 1,000 years? You don't overthrow it, you make it irrelevant, and that's exactly what happened. World War I ended monarchy as a legitimate form of rule in Europe. 4 major empires collapsed. Start with Russia. March 1917. Food riots. The army refuses to fire on protesters. Tsar Nicholas II abdicates. The Romanov dynasty ends. November 1917. The Bolsheviks seize power. Lenin establishes the world's first communist state. July 1918. The Romanov family is executed in the basement of the Ipatiev house. The execution is chaotic. The Grand Duchesses had sewn diamonds into their corsets. The gems deflect bullets. Executioners resort to bayonets. The bodies are burned, doused with acid, thrown into a mine shaft. In 1991, 9 bodies are recovered. In 2007, the last 2 children are found. The entire family erased. 304 years of dynasty ended. Now the Ottoman Empire, October 1918. The Ottomans surrender. 1919 to 1923. The empire is carved up. British take Iraq, Palestine, Transjordan. French take Syria and Lebanon. The entire Middle East is redrawn. Sykes-Picot Agreement. Borders drawn on maps in London and Paris. No consideration for ethnic or religious divisions. Iraq was created by mashing together 3 Ottoman provinces. Kurds in the north, Sunni Arabs in the center, Shia Arabs in the south. three groups who didn't want to share a country, forced into one state. Syria became a French mandate with borders that ignored every ethnic and religious reality on the ground. Palestine became a British mandate. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 committed Britain to supporting a Jewish homeland while also protecting the rights of non-Jewish communities. Britain made promises it couldn't keep to both groups. The Ottoman collapse didn't just end an empire, it created a powder keg that's still exploding today. But two more empires were about to fall. Austria-Hungary dissolved overnight. 7 new nation-states emerged where one empire had stood, the Habsburg dynasty gone. In Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated on November 9, 1918, and fled to the Netherlands. The Weimar Republic was born, but it arrived in defeat and humiliation. And the poison started spreading immediately. November 2nd, 1918. Before the armistice was even signed, German politicians were already pointing fingers. The stab-in-the-back myth. Germany didn't lose on the battlefield. It was betrayed by traitors at home. A year later, November 18, 1919, Field Marshal Hindenburg testified before the National Assembly. The army was stabbed in the back, he claimed, by Jews, socialists, and Republicans. He even made up a quote from a British general to make the lie sound credible. The myth that would put Hitler in power wasn't born in the 1930s. It was born in 1918, before the First World War had even ended. The seeds of the Second World War were planted in the wreckage of the First. Before 1914, monarchy felt permanent, natural, the only legitimate way to govern. After 1918, it looked archaic, a relic of a dead world. The age of kings was over, but kings weren't the only ones who died. An entire social class was about to be wiped out. World War I destroyed the entire aristocratic class, not just with bullets, but with something far more devastating. Start with the bloodshed. In the British Army, officers had a 17% death rate. Enlisted men, 12%. Why the difference? Because officers led from the front. When the whistle blew and men went over the top, the officer went first, pistol in hand. Britain's aristocratic families lost an entire generation. 20% of heirs to peerages who served never came home. 1 in 5 Oxford graduates between 1910 and 1914 died in the trenches. Eton lost over 1,000 former students. Corpus Christi College at Oxford took the worst hit. 90 deaths out of 351 who served. 25%. That's 4.5 years of students gone. The halls that should have been filled with the next generation of politicians and judges stood empty. Rudyard Kipling pulled strings to get his son John into the army despite the boy's terrible eyesight. John died at Loos in 1915, aged 18. His body wasn't identified until 1992. Kipling died in 1936, never knowing where his son was buried. He spent 2 decades searching. These weren't just deaths. These were extinctions of family lines, estates without heirs, titles with no one to inherit. But the trenches only wounded the aristocracy. What killed it was something they never saw coming. Taxation. Estate duty jumped from 8% in 1894 to 40% by 1919. If a lord died in 1915 and his son died in 1917, the estate got hit twice in rapid succession. Families had to sell land just to pay the treasury. From 1918 to 1921, 25% of England's land changed hands. The largest land transfer since the Norman conquest. Tenant farmers bought the estates they'd worked for generations. The feudal system ended not through revolution, but through tax bills. Over 400 country houses were demolished between the wars. Not damaged, demolished. Torn down because no one could afford the upkeep. But the final blow was something intangible: the loss of deference. Before the war, British society ran on deference. You respected your betters. The aristocracy ruled because that was the natural order. The war shattered that. Millions of working-class men served under aristocratic officers and watched them make catastrophic mistakes. They saw incompetent commanders order pointless attacks that achieved nothing but mass slaughter. After witnessing that, why would they ever defer to these people again? Women who'd worked in munitions factories, earning their own wages and doing men's work, weren't going back to serving aristocratic families for poverty wages. The social contract was broken. By the 1930s, the British aristocracy was economically ruined, demographically devastated, and socially irrelevant. They still had their titles, but the power? Gone. World War I didn't just kill aristocrats, it killed aristocracy as a viable system of rule. Monarchy gone, aristocracy finished. But there was one more pillar of the old world left standing, and it was about to collapse. World War I destroyed the moral legitimacy of empire. Before 1914, colonialism was considered justified. The white man's burden, the idea that European powers had a duty to civilize backward peoples. This was mainstream thinking. World War I shattered it. Colonial troops fought. India sent 1.5 million soldiers. 11 Indian soldiers won the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor. France deployed 600,000 soldiers from African colonies. They fought at Verdun, the Somme, the Marne. They bled for empires that treated them as second-class subjects. Then they went home. And the question became unavoidable. If we're equal in the trenches, why not in peacetime? Britain tried to manage it with limited reforms. The result? The Indian independence movement exploded. By 1920, Gandhi was leading mass civil disobedience. Arab soldiers fought for Britain against the Ottomans. T.E. Lawrence promised them independence. Then came the betrayal. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 promised the Kurds a referendum on independence. Article 64. 3 years later, the Treaty of Lausanne erased it. Why? Oil. The League awarded Mosul to Iraq because Britain needed the oil fields. 30 million Kurds today remain stateless. The betrayal of 1923 still fuels conflict. World War I didn't immediately end colonialism, but it planted a seed that would grow into something unstoppable. After 1918, you couldn't claim colonized peoples were inferior. They'd proved their equality in the trenches. And empire, as a civilizing mission, impossible to maintain after civilized nations spent 4 years slaughtering each other with poison gas. By 1920, empire's legitimacy was mortally wounded. It would take 40 more years to die, but the death sentence was signed. 3 pillars had fallen: monarchy, aristocracy, empire. All gone. But something new was being born. World War I created the New World. First, modern ideologies. The Bolshevik Revolution created the world's first communist state, and suddenly, communism wasn't just theory, it was real. A functioning government. Russia pulled out of the war with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918. The Western powers tried to strangle the Bolshevik government in its cradle. They failed. By 1922, the Soviet Union existed. For 70 years, communism versus capitalism would define global politics, but fascism emerged too. Italy, 1919. Mussolini creates the fascist movement, reaction to post-war chaos. He marched on Rome in 1922. Dictator by 1925. Germany, 1920. The Nazi Party founded. The conditions? Created entirely by World War I. Versailles. Reparations. Hyperinflation. National humiliation. Hitler exploited all of it. Chancellor by 1933. The war set the stage for both communism and fascism, but the transformation wasn't finished. World War I was about to change who could vote and who had rights. Second, women's suffrage. Women couldn't vote in most countries. The argument against it was simple: too emotional, too irrational. World War I destroyed that argument. Women worked in munitions factories. By 1918, Britain had nearly 1 million. They proved they could do men's work. Britain gave women over 30 the vote in 1918. United States, 19th Amendment in 1920. Germany, 1918. Third, the nation-state system. Before World War I, empires were standard. After, the nation-state became the new standard. The Treaty of Versailles redrew the map. Poland re-established. Czechoslovakia created. Yugoslavia created. Every nation should have its own state. Messy in practice, ethnic groups didn't live in neat boundaries. But the idea was established. The nation-state, not the empire, became legitimate political organization. The United Nations today is an organization of nation-states, not empires. World War I created our modern world. But here's the controversial part. World War II didn't change nearly as much. It was more destructive, but less transformative. Let's be clear, it was bigger. 70 to 85 million deaths. The Holocaust, nuclear weapons, deadliest conflict in history. But did it fundamentally change how civilization was organized? Decolonization accelerated afterward. India gained independence in 1947. But the moral case for empire was already destroyed by 1920. The Second World War just bankrupted Britain and France to the point where they couldn't hold their empires anymore. The rise of the superpowers. After 1945, the US and USSR dominated the globe, but the United States was already the world's largest economy by 1920. The Soviet Union was created by World War I. Nuclear weapons are the one genuinely new element. The atomic bomb fundamentally altered great power conflict. But that's a technological change, not a political or social transformation. It doesn't restructure civilization the way the death of monarchy did. The United Nations was founded in 1945 to prevent future wars. Except the League of Nations was created in 1920 for exactly the same reason. The concept of international collective security came from World War I. The Cold War defined the second half of the 20th century. Communism versus capitalism, East versus West. But both of those ideologies, born from World War I. So what was different afterward? The fundamental systems had already changed. The old order of monarchs and empires was gone. The new systems, nation-states, competing ideologies, mass politics were already in place. The Second War was fought in a world that the First War had created. Between nation-states, the First War had established. Using ideologies the First War had produced. With an understanding of total societal mobilization the First War had introduced. Think of it this way. World War I changed the rules of how the world worked. World War II was played according to those new rules. The First War ended monarchy and created the nation-state system. The Second War was a conflict between nation-states. The First War created the competing ideologies. The Second War was the clash between them. The First War normalized total war. The Second War perfected it. World War II was more deadly and more destructive, but it operated within the framework World War I had built. And here's the proof we're still living in. World War I's world. Every major conflict today traces its roots back to decisions made between 1914 and 1918. That's the case for why World War I changed civilization more than World War II. But I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think World War II was actually more transformative? If you found this valuable, hit the like button and subscribe for more analysis on how wars and economic systems reshape civilization. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.